Hello, so in this video we're going to start talking about what it means to actually simplify algebra. Now, the word simplify is quite ambiguous in algebra because honestly it depends on the situation you're dealing with. But in general, all it really means is it's to make something look simpler, okay? It's to make something look better and easier to read. Now, in order to understand this, we first of all need to understand what a like term is. It's the most basic way of simplifying algebra. So let me write something like this down. Let's suppose I write down 3x minus 4y plus 7xy plus 6x plus y. Okay. Now, what I've written down here is a collection of terms. By the way, I would call this an expression. The difference between an expression and an equation is an equation has to have an equals in it. Because this hasn't got an equals, therefore it must be an expression. Okay. Now, what I've written down here is a collection of terms. The terms are just the bits in between the pluses and the minuses. For example, I would consider 3x as one term. I'd consider 4y as another term. I'd consider 7xy as another term. A 6x is another term. And a y is another term. So does that make sense? Like it's the bits in between the pluses and the minuses. So what do the pluses and minuses do? Well, you can kind of think about them as they tell you what the sign of the term is, whether it's positive or whether it's negative. For instance, this 4y here in the middle, if you look at the sign before it, it is negative, which means that it must be negative 4y. That's the sign of the 4y term. It's negative. If I look, for example, at the 7y term, the sign before it is positive, which means that that term must also be positive. There's a 6x term there, the sign before it is plus, which means it must be positive. And then finally, if I look at this y term, the sign before it is a positive, which means that it must be positive as well. Okay. You notice I missed one out there. What about the 3x? Is that positive or is it negative? Because there's no sign written before that. Well, we can kind of think, because there's no sign written before it, it must be positive, okay? Because if it was negative, we would write a negative there. So we would have written a negative there. But because there's no sign written there, we take that to be positive 3x. Now, if I want to collect these together, I need to understand what I mean by a like term. Now, like terms are essentially, I look at the variables and I say, right, which terms have variables in common? For example, I have a look at 3x. Now that variable in that term is just an x. So I need to look through my expression and I need to see how many other terms there are with just an x in. So let me have a look. Well, look, you see there, that term there does technically have an x in, but it's also got a y. So that wouldn't be a like term. I just want just an x in there. So now if I have a look at the next term, there's an x term which has just an x in. So if I want to collect these together, I kind of think, right, my first term, I've got 3 x's, and in the next like term, the 6x term, I've got 6 x's. So how many x's do I have in total? Well, 3 x's, and then I've got plus 6x terms, because you notice the sign of that term in front of me. Therefore, I must have 9x in total. I must have 9x in total. 3 x's, 6 x's, make 9 x's in total. Okay. If I have a look at my y term next, or have a look at this term, well, look, I have negative 4y's. So what's the other like term? Well, it's this one here. Very same reason, because it's got y in, but it's also got an x in. So that's not a like term. So I have negative 4y, I have plus y. How many y's do I have in total? I have minus 3y. You see negative there, because I start off with negative 4y's, and then I add on an extra y, so I must have negative 3y. By the way, you notice we didn't write 1y. That's what it means, but I didn't write 1y because you would never say one apple, you just say an apple, yeah? Okay, fantastic. And let's have a look at this term. What about this term here? Well, because there are no other terms which have an x and a y in, there's no other like terms. So I just simply write, if I wanted to simplify this thing here, let me get rid of all my 3x minus 4y plus 7xy plus 6x plus y comes out as 9x minus 3y plus 7xy. Now, I've taken 5 terms and I've reduced it down to 3 by collecting together like terms. Hope that makes sense.